All right, everyone ready? Cool.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So ready.
Resolved. The gentrification of New Orleans neighborhoods is doing more harm than good. We will be upholding the affirmation and the government's stance on this. To begin, I'm just going to go over some very quick, brief definitions here. First, I want to define what exactly gentrification is. According to Merriam-Webster dictionary, gentrification is the process of renewal and rebuilding and accompanying the influx of middle class or affluent people into determining areas that often displaces poor residents. We're also going to make a quick observation here that doing implies what is currently happening. Now we also see how exactly you're going to view this round. So at the end of the day, when you hear both the affirmative and the negation case, how you're going to vote. What we're going to say is that it's going to be a cost-benefit analysis specifically for the people of New Orleans, which leads me into my first contention, which is observations. There's a couple of things here that I really think we need to observe before we really dive into the depth of this round. The first is we need to start with what happened to New Orleans after Katrina. What we see here is that Katrina decimated the city for really all of its people. However, what we saw here is that what people, like the people from the city and the government officials, they were really worried that the soul of this city would leave because so many people were displaced. People similarly thought that after another natural disaster in the 1970s. And they wanted to make sure, because they did lose a lot of natural talent back then, that kind of problem wouldn't happen again. And so what the government did was they created incentives for people to move back. But the problem was that these incentives primarily went to people of privilege, specifically white people, and who took advantage of this. Now, actually, very interestingly, it wasn't primarily people who were even from New Orleans. It's people who were lured to the idea of New Orleans, primarily artists who were not actually familiar with traditional New Orleans culture. So we saw here that a lot of people who moved back weren't even from these areas. However, what we saw here is that some people did decide to move back, and some people even stayed throughout the storm, and those people, the people who are actually authentically from New Orleans people, are the ones who are really struggling here today. So, which leads me into my second contention, which is this, is going to be culture. One of the most important things that we need to observe here is that the reason why people like New Orleans, because unlike any other cities, like we have our potholes and we have like a lot of struggling problems here, but people move to Orleans and people love New Orleans because it is the soul, because of the soul that's within the city that comes from its people. And to really understand what this is, we need to understand how exactly did it get this soul. Like, I think we can really observe like its original, like where it originally came was through jazz. What we can see here is that the black community has traditionally had its own authentic vibe. It started with the gospels and how they sang that during slavery, and through time and through transitions, we saw that transition to jazz. It was something very unique to the African American community. And this was born out of oppression and self-expression that other forms of music weren't able to give them to have. However, with time, what we've seen here is that specifically white liberals have seized this black identity and have caused cultural appropriation. So what was once unique to the African American community, and what made the city so great, what made it so new, has instead been stolen by white culture. And another important observation here is that this whitewashing is continuing to happen today. The way this whitewashing is happening now is through gentrification. And we're seeing here is that the people who really understand what it means to have jazz, what it means to actually authentically express themselves, are being kicked out and are no longer a part of the New Orleans community. And instead, predominantly white people, specifically people who are middle and upper middle class, who come from privileged backgrounds, going to privileged schools, coming here to try to get this experience. However, they cannot authentically live it because they do not have the ability to. And so the direct impact of that is that we're seeing the authenticity of this city going away. One example of this is just like of an impact of where this is going is the Pearl District within Portland, Oregon. Although there's this misconception that Portland is like this huge like hipster city, what we saw here is that back when Portland was actually like this, we saw that there was authentic people there, specifically the hippies and the artists, and those have been replaced by people with lots of money who wish to live that experience. However, you're no longer able to authentically live that. Portlandia is an example of the whitewashing and elitists taking over within a certain area. And so the direct impact of what's happening here within New Orleans is this. Number one, we see that the culture of the city is simply being destroyed. It's being co-opted into something that is no longer real. Two, we're also seeing here that people, specifically the original black population that was here for years and years and years, is being forced out because they cannot afford to live in expensive gentrified areas. And another impact of that is that what happens with gentrification is that there's actually a net increase in the amount of black poverty, because what happened before this was there was a lot of safety nets that were in place. For example, there were like food, like there was a place where you get food, there were shelters and so forth, and what happens with gentrification is rich white people don't want those in their, like, near their homes, and so they go away, which means that the standard of living for the traditional population of New Orleans and the people who actually made the city great is going away. Which leads me into my third contention, which is this: education. What we saw here is that there are trying to be these big major initiatives after Katrina. And the big initiatives were this, where they create charter schools. However, this new charter school system has been detrimental to the people of New Orleans, specifically the black population. What we've seen here is that more money has been going to white schools, and also white schools are the ones that have been rebuilt, while the ones that were actually really significantly damaged by Katrina and other events have not been rebuilt, have not been refurbished, or anything along those lines. So what we can see here is that there was a population within this city, mostly due to gentrification because of how the money stealing and how it goes within the charter school system, that are getting underfunded. Whereas traditional public schools, what we had before this gentrification, although they weren't great, they were significantly better than what we have now. And we all know that education is key to making it so people have better lives and opportunities. And when we have this gentrified system that promotes charter schools, we see a couple direct impacts here. The first impact that we see is the continuation of the educational divide within whites and blacks within this city. We also see the continuation of the economic divide between whites and blacks within the city. And we also see the cycle of poverty continue. We keep on saying that the whites are able to get ahead while black people are not able to do this. What we can see here, in summation, at the end of the day, that gentrification is making the lives for the minority populations within this city worse. And even for the people who do somewhat benefit from this gentrified city, will never be able to live the authentic lifestyle of the city because the people who made it great aren't able to express themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, and call the second.
Cool. As a brief off-time roadmap, I'm just going to quickly go over the framing of the round, then I'm going to go through off-case points and then on-case points. Is everybody ready? Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your recognition. Resolve: the gentrification of New Orleans neighborhoods is doing more harm than good. So, the government sets up some definitions, which we mostly agree with, I'll get to on case, but they mostly set up this weighing mechanism of a cost-benefit analysis for New Orleans, and we absolutely agree with this weighing mechanism. Just want to do a little bit of further analysis about what this truly means. This means that we're not just looking at the neighborhoods that they're, that they're performing gentrification in. I'm not really sure how that works as a verb or a noun. We're not just talking about those neighborhoods themselves. We're talking about New Orleans as a whole, the entirety of the city. So with that, let's get into the contentions proposed by the opposition. Contention 1 is the economy. Subpoint A. We will be bringing new money into the city through gentrification. Oftentimes, gentrification involves, people from out of town, people from very different parts of the country, different parts of the world, coming into the city, coming into these neighborhoods for the purposes of gentrification. This means they're bringing in new money that was not in the neighborhood, that was not in New Orleans in the first place, and adding this money to the economy is always going to boost the economy. Subpoint B is new businesses. This is one thing that's never brought up by the government, but is a huge part of gentrification. This idea that when people come into the city, when people come to these new places, they often bring with them new businesses, new innovations, new ideas, and they create these within these cities, in this case in New Orleans. This is going to increase the number of businesses we have, which has a lot of great economic impacts. First of all, it's going to increase hiring and increase employment within the city, which is very good for people of both low income, high income, etc. It's going to hire everyone. It's going to up that hiring and up that employment. Not right now, thank you. But also it's going to be increasing spending and consumption in general, which is also something that is always going to be able to boost the economy and is always going to be helpful. So that means that we're going to be helping the economy in many ways. The impact of this is that helping the economy helps all of New Orleans, both the rich, both the poor. It's going to be helping everyone. And it's also going to be a foundation for everything else they set up in the government case. They talk about how important culture is, and they talk about how important education is, but we can't have either of those things unless we have some sort of thriving economy. So this is absolutely necessary to even build upon the points that they're talking about in the first
So real quick, so when you have a thriving economy and it's a hotbed for business, what happens to real estate prices?
Sure, they're going to go up. We're going to get into why that's not going to be a really big problem. So don't even worry about it. So contention 2 is diversity. Subpoint A is diversity in general. Gentrification often brings in people of new races into existing neighborhoods. New Orleans is a specifically good example of this, and this has several big impacts. First of all, diversity is inherently good for our communities because it increases things like cultural knowledge, cultural sensitivity. You're going to be exposing people to new ideas, new places, things they've never seen before. Alexander tries to bring this up in his speech as a negative thing. He's saying, you know, they're going to just be performing cultural appropriation. They can never authentically experience the culture. But if they can never authentically experience the culture, does that mean they shouldn't try, that we shouldn't be exposed to new ideas and new things and new cultures? It doesn't mean we should just separate ourselves. It means we should do better. So we can increase that cultural sensitivity, increase that cultural knowledge. We just have to take a different means, a different approach than Alexander's talking about. And second impact is going to be that when low-income people live in situations with high-income people in the same neighborhood, it has been empirically proven through multiple studies that the low-income people's income will go up. So this diversity is actually going to be having both a positive, not right now, thank you, impact on them economically and culturally. So this is going to be really important. Subpoint B under diversity is that of schools, which is going to go directly clashing with the points proposed by the government. So when you have this gentrification happening, it's going to increase the diversity within neighborhoods, which in turn increases diversity within schools. Diversity in schools, especially low education, K through 12 education, is extremely important for the same reasons we already talked about. It's necessary for growth and necessary to have the best possible kinds of education. You're introduced to more perspectives, more cultural knowledge. You're going to be a more sensitive and well-informed person. If we don't have this diversity in schools, people are not going to learn from a young age how to experience all these things, how to have all these alternative viewpoints, all these different perspectives, so they're not going to be getting the best possible education. So to increase the quality of education for all, it's absolutely necessary to have this diversity that is brought by gentrification. And New Orleans is specifically key in this idea about diversity. Right now, we already have big problems with the uptown-downtown dichotomy about, a white city and a black city. We have this problem right now with this dichotomy between the two. However, if you have gentrification, you're going to be bridging that gap and providing more diversity into all the different cities, which is absolutely important for the impacts that we already outlined. Contention 3 is revival following Katrina. The neighborhoods most affected by Katrina are the ones most likely to be gentrified, if that's the correct verb. Lots of empty houses already exist right now. They're not being dealt with properly, and so this is a lot of unrecognized economic potential. So New Orleans has already done a lot. However, there's lots that still needs to be done in terms of these empty houses, in terms of places that still need to be fixed, and we need to bring in new and innovative perspectives and ideas. That's absolutely key in order to solving back these problems, in order to rebuild the city to be the best that it can be. And so for that, let's get back to the points proposed by the government and do some direct refutation. First, on the definition of gentrification, we agree with this mostly. However, it ends with this part about how it has to necessarily displace the poor. We agree with the idea that it increases value of homes, etc., but not that it displaces the poor. In fact, a study put out by The Atlantic that's done by Columbia says that people don't necessarily move out when gentrification happens, and if they do, they're not necessarily going to poorer places, so it's not necessarily that this rise in property taxes is pushing people out. That's been empirically disproved. So that's not something that's actually part of gentrification in and of itself. So that's not part of the definition, but the rest we agree with the idea that it increases value, etc. So let's go on to their contentions. Their first one is just an observation about Katrina. You can group contentions 1 and 2 since they're pretty similar. They're just talking about culture. New Orleans culture is still strong and very clear within our city, and it clearly has not been that harmed by by gentrification, by what we're already doing. After Katrina, we still see New Orleans culture thriving. So lots of these impacts are moot. Also, on the idea of culture, diversity is helping this culture thrive. They talk about things like more artists moving here. That's going to mean they're going to be picking up on New Orleans art. They're going to learn that art. They're going to spread that art. We're exposing people to culture that they might never have ever seen otherwise and be able to expose more of the world to it. Like Alexander tries to make this point where people who aren't from the culture can never authentically experience it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. That doesn't mean we should alienate other cultures because they're not part of our own. We should try to learn and try to see other cultures and try to experience new and other things. Absolutely, we should not be appropriating other cultures, but it doesn't mean we should not try to experience and learn from from them and be part of them in some sort of way. That leads to way worse impacts of separation that are really bad. Also, on these, you can group this to all of them, economy impacts are coming first because we can't thrive culturally with economic pressure. We need to have things like, places to play music, people to live here, in order to get the access to the impacts of the culture that they're talking about. Lastly, on education, first, this is just empirically denied. Even primarily black schools are tending to do better now than they were pre-Katrina. And second of all, we're providing better warrants about why our education will be better by things like diversity. And for all of these reasons, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.